Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the Will and Dave Show. Tonight's episode, we're going to be touching on a couple of more sensitive topics, namely the more recent protests that have been happening in Canada, as well as talking about student debt and trade skills a little bit. So we might get into some hairy stuff with the protests, but the trade skill stuff should be pretty safe. But we just want to warn you ahead of time.
Welcome to the Will and Dave Show.
Will, you didn't say your signature line was like cue
My what?
turn the music on.
Oh yeah, I kind of flubbed it a little bit, but you nailed it.
But hey,
You got
I
it.
made it. You like where I'm at?
Oh yes, it looks lovely.
I am on the beach.
Do you like chill summer Will going on here?
Oh,
It's a new camera settings, a backwards cap, and only a t-shirt. Oh
yes,
yeah,
it zoomed right in on your face. Are we able to?
so chill. You're the one who zoomed in on me. I mean, or here, I can adjust
No,
it.
no, I got it. I got
Okay,
this.
okay.
I got
okay.
this. There we go. That's better.
There you go. There you go.
I got it.
There you go. Doing your job as the producer.
Oh man. So your mother, who we will mention again in a few minutes,
Mhm.
was doing a webinar all weekend, and she does it on a green screen.
Right.
And I left this afternoon because her last episode was at 3 and went to 4:30, and then we had a dinner, and I got home about 15 minutes ago. So I did not remove the green screen. Instead, I am going to live on the beach today.
Lovely. This feels like such a role reversal. Me, who spent like all afternoon kind of fiddling with the camera and tweaking my lighting and really prepping for tonight, and then you, who's like last minute screeching into your chair, barely ready to go.
That is me screeching into the chair. I don't screech very much, but yeah, I get
Kind
what
of
you're
just
saying.
roll.
Yeah.
But yeah.
Slide.
Slide. There you go. There you go. Slide.
But
So-
speaking of your mother,
Yes.
Hi, I'm Susan. I think that in all the world, there's nothing quite like the coziness of a handmade quilt. So I'm on a mission to spread that love as far and wide as I can. If you're a quilt maker, I offer long arm quilting services and I accept work from anywhere in North America. If you already know how to make quilts and you want to learn how to machine quilt them yourself, I have a number of classes and lots of tutorials available that can help you with that. And if you don't want to do any of those processes, you just want to go straight to having the quilt with no delay, I do have a number of fully completed quilts available for sale as well. So details on all of those things can be found on my website, www.stitchedbysusan.com. Well, I've got to get back to quilting, so I'm going to let you get back to the Will and Dave Show. Enjoy.
And also, if you'd like to support the show more directly,
that's right.
you can go to www.buymeacoffee.com/Will and Dave Show, where for the price of a cup of coffee, you can, slide a little bit of money our way as we help us try to grow the show a little bit.
And since I am going to come up and visit you in a few weeks,
Oh,
I
yeah.
may even, if you give me the money because it comes in the U.S. account, I may even get William a coffee with some of that.
I might get a coffee and a cookie.
Heck with a cookie, just a coffee.
Well, no, with the Canadian exchange rate, I might get a little extra.
Oh, that's right.
Yeah, a little extra just for me.
No, I pocket the extra for the transportation cost of that $5.
Oof. Oof.
So, Will,
So,
how's your week been?
week's been pretty good actually. It's been very warm again. Not as warm as the previous week, but still quite toasty. But no, it's been pretty good. I've been finally making some headway with learning how to use the fancy dancy new camera and tweak my lighting. And we're approved for a new place, so hopefully by the end of this month we'll be moved into somewhere new.
Oh, right on.
And yeah, have some new digs. Might have a fancier set behind me, hopefully.
Your mother is going up. She'll be cooking at a Bible camp for 130 people this week.
That sounds like a nightmare.
Footloose and fancy free this week.
Ooh.
So we might see maybe some new layouts for the show or something next week to have some fun with because Susan's gone.
Oh my.
Clean house when she's not here, right? So
You realize you just said that on record, right?
yeah, but she's not watching. We have 0 people watching, and she never listened to the podcast. So unless somebody rats on me, she'll never find out.
Who would do that? I can't think of anyone who would do that.
I can't think of anybody either. So we
Okay,
had a
so
number of topics that we wanted to touch on this week. And
yes.
where should we begin, Will? You name the first one, I'll name the second one, we'll end on the third.
Well, let's start with the title card. We'll start with
Okay.
what our thumbnail is. So, violence and protests, specifically in relation to the most recent ones in Canada over the well, recently there's been a lot
That's
of
right.
discourse and discontent, specifically with the church and the Catholic Church. Again, more specifically, still with the Catholic Church,
Yes.
over the findings of these mass burial sites at residential schools.
Yes.
And it's becoming kind of a big deal here in Canada because we're not talking like a few burial sites. We're talking the remains of upwards of 1,000 kids confirmed just in ones found this year
Yes.
alone. Like I don't want this to come across as like hyperbole, but we're talking genocide levels of death here. So it's pretty extreme stuff, especially for like, good old Canada. This is some pretty wild
What is the
stuff.
definition of genocide? Do you know it just off the top of your head?
I was looking it up earlier this week. If I remember correctly, it's less about the actual numbers and more about the intent. So genocide is the intent to wipe away a
Whoops.
people or culture or belief system, I believe. You can probably Google it.
I have Googled it.
Deliberate killing of a large number of people from a particular nation or ethnic group with the aim of destroying that nation or group. So by that definition, yes, like the even if the children in these residential schools aren't like actively being like killed, their deaths happening as a result of it, and the intent of the schools being to kind of strip the kids of their original native culture. It would qualify as genocide, and the Canadian government hasn't been handling it very well. And the church has just been kind of church. I say the church, as in like the Catholic Church, has been pretty much just ignoring it. They're not talking about it, and they were generally Catholic-run schools. So there's been a lot of outcry for the Catholic Church to at least say something or acknowledge it, and for the Canadian government to do something. I don't know if retaliation is the right term. I don't know what the Canadian government can really do outside of acknowledgement.
Well, that comes back to the age-old issue or question with all the historical wrongs on people.
Hmm.
So if we look at slavery, if we look at this, what is the current, what should be the current answer for
Right.
historical wrongs?
It's funny. Your brother was actually asking the exact or a similar question. He was asking, how do we respond to these crimes, these atrocities that were committed in the past? Now, obviously, the residential schools aren't that far in the past, but slavery, in theory, is a past thing,
Right.
which we're still dealing with the ramifications of.
Well, I would argue a little bit on the schools, as I believe that the schools in the history of Canada is about equal to the history of slavery in the U.S. It was early on in the life of Canada. So as a ratio of the life of a nation,
relative to the age of the
Yes.
nation, I think you have a point there.
I think it's in the infancy of a nation which is finding itself and finding its
Mhm.
its identity. And I think
Mhm.
I think early on, I think it's safe to say that the First Nations were not a desired identity.
No.
I think that's a safe thing to say. It may not
Mm.
be a good thing to say, but I think it's safe that
I,
that they
I think it's a
looked
safe statement.
at the U.S. as well. I think
Mhm.
they looked at the savages, as they used to call them in their writings, and say,
Yeah.
we have to tame the savages by any means necessary.
Mm-hmm. And it just so happens that Canada's method was less, shooting and more forcibly taking kids, sticking them in schools, and trying to just quote unquote educate their own culture out of them.
Yes, I would say, and this is the one area that we probably agree on, is there's the hue and the cry over the graves as though it were murder. And it wasn't.
Well, we don't. That's the thing. It's hard to tell.
Well, if you look at the historical records, and there are a fair number of them from the government agencies who were going around to the schools, the majority of them, they were dying of TB, there were illnesses that they were dying of. And again, so this is not
Yes.
excusing the behavior, it's not excusing
Yeah.
the graves, except
Because I think
it's not as though in the U.S. where they were shooting the
Mhm.
Indians, and rounding them
Yeah.
up and driving them over cliffs. It's not as though they were lined up and shot and dumped in a hole and buried.
as far as we know, yes.
Right. As far as we know. Again, there is
Yeah,
a fair
it's-
bit of records on the causes of death.
Yes. This is where it gets kind of gray for me. Is there's a lot of there are records like that are like lots of records of cause of death and things like that, but so many other records were actively either destroyed or just omitted. Like, children, where they came from, who their parents are, and all these different things, where they actively tried to bury that knowledge.
Yes.
And so I have to wonder how factual the records by the Canadian government, by the churches who are running these schools, how factual their records are. Like, if a kid, if this is all hypothetical, this is not
Yes.
truth, but if, let's say, a school teacher was beating the living crap out of a kid and accidentally kills him or wounds him, and he ends up dying from said wounds, what's to stop them from writing TB on a piece of paperwork and chuck them in a hole out back where the rest of them are? So I can't say with any certainty that that's what happened.
We have to look at the efficacy of the government at the time. And I don't
know.
So since there is no proof either way, we sort of have to go by the evidence that we have.
Yes.
Because I'm not going to look at the bones of the teenager and say, oh, he was beat to death, because that's going to be hard to prove.
Well, they can. Doing it on such like a scale is kind of unheard of. But yeah, it's hard to say one way or the other. So I'm kind of sitting in the middle. I'm treating it as though the people who ran the schools they have a responsibility for the kids. And as far as I see it, their non-disclosure of how many and why there are so many corpses in such like vast quantities is at a minimum like gross negligence. I'm with you that calling it outright murder is harsh because we don't know.
As though it sort of intimated that these are murders and these graves were full of murdered kids, and that has been the intimation of a lot of the protests. It actually, the word murder and genocide, it says that they were killed on purpose. You can't look at genocide and say, ooh, it was accidental genocide.
No, I think that the erasure of their culture was active, and the deaths were a byproduct of that. I don't think that we went out of our way with the intent of killing off children, but I think that the intent of erasing their culture, and some of them died, and we seem to or the government at the time and the church at the time seemed to consider that an acceptable loss, which is atrocious. And
so
while I'm hesitant
against you on the genocide, though, and again, I hadn't thought of this until I read the definition, and hearing you say that, it sort of reverses the roles. Is in one, you're saying that they were dying as a result of removing the culture.
No, a byproduct. So them being herded into schools where they may or may not be being treated humanely or safely, and the rate at which they were dying. I'm going to go out on a limb here and assume that kids weren't dying at those same rates in other schools throughout the country. There weren't mass graves at most normal people's schools. Normal people, like non-residential schools.
Except if we look at the definition of genocide, it's the deliberate murder, killing of large number of people with the aim of destroying a nation or group. And I think in this case, there was an aim of destroying a people or group, except I don't think it was an aim of destroying the people. It's an aim of
destroying the culture.
Right, of destroying the culture. And again, the fact that a bunch of them were
But what else do you call it? You could call it genocidal or
Well, I
genocide-ish.
don't think it
I mean,
is.
there.
I don't think murder or the
So we,
death of the kids was ever the intent. And I think with genocidal,
you could call it.
the intent is to
So on
kill
it,
them.
yeah. On a serious note, I think that the terminology we're looking for is cultural genocide, or
Is that
cultural
even a
erasure.
thing?
I mean, I've heard it. How official it is, I could not tell you.
Oh, I keep
Um,
scrolling up the wrong stinking
what
window.
I would like to coin an alternate term. This is the humorous part. I would like to coin genocide light.
Oh my god.
So
On a serious note, is that what you just said?
no, that was the
Genocide
funny
light on
note.
a serious
That was
note.
that was the lighthearted note. The serious note was I think it's cultural genocide or cultural erasure. But on a,
Cultural erasure, I can see. I think
the fact remains though that like
to say
if it,
it's genocide, it puts you in again the category of Tucker Jones
Tucker Jones,
or Tucker
Carlson,
Carlson. I'm sorry,
yeah.
Carlson. It
So I
puts you
wouldn't
in that
say it is
hyperbole
genocide.
to make a point.
But the difference is here. The difference is that we are sitting here talking about it. It's not just me saying that's basically genocide and then stopping. That's there's
No,
no
actually, it would
context. There's
be
no discussion.
now. Is that genocide?
Oh yeah.
And
Now
then
is that
changing the scene.
genocide? Because it kind of sounds like genocide to me.
You need to work on your Tucker. I think we could do an episode of you doing Tucker.
Am I like? Can I use my one swear word?
Absolutely.
Go fuck yourself, Tucker Carlson. Okay, we're good now. I got it out of my system.
Got it out.
I'm fine.
It is a. You know the way I feel about hyperbole in dealing
Yeah.
with sensitive things, and I do think this is amazingly sensitive.
Yeah,
This
I
people
think
who died as a result of the actions of the church and the government.
yes.
And they did,
I-
and they died as a result of those actions. Now, I don't know that their actions were the
There we go.
cause, as a lot of people were dying of TB. A lot of people were dying of diseases.
Yes.
The average age in the prairies in Canada, I was reading a little while ago, the average age of death was in the 30s in some of the northern areas. And so this is not
not outlandish,
No,
but
it's
still
not. And
abnormal.
there were records of the kids who were brought into some of the schools,
Mhm.
and I believe in Alberta or BC, I can't remember the province. And
Mhm.
as there were the records which the government agencies were writing down as they were brought into the schools.
Mhm.
Now, we're not going to get into the reasons for why they were brought in, as I agree with you that the reasons for
Right.
that are suspect at best.
Mhm.
But on the records, they were alive, they were sick, or they were dead.
Mm.
And those were how they arrived. So obviously there was an issue with people who were brought into the schools
Yeah.
who were already dead. And
Yeah.
this is not, it isn't excusing actions at all, although I believe that there was rampant ill health.
Mhm.
There was rampant issues. And I think that as a government of Canada who apologized to a terrorist,
We could do
paid
better
him
than what we're
however
doing.
many $1 million to shut up and go away.
There's some context to that, but yes, continue.
I think that they could at least say something
And
and
I
make a commission to uncover what actually happened,
that would be
or
great.
pay for autopsies or something. Like, I'm sure
That would be
they could do
awesome.
more.
We
in
act so
the-
quickly and so decisively when it comes to, I say quickly and decisively with big quotation marks on things like climate change or LGBTQ rights, because those track really well with the polls.
Yeah,
But when it
that's
comes to an actual Canadian tragedy like this, like a serious like blight on our historical record that we should be addressing and talking about and dealing with, the government's just mum. They're just like, we don't want to talk about it. That's
This is the-
actually a difficult topic.
This is the same government who we entrust with our health care. And we entrust with our education.
Vote NDP.
Oh, yeah. Don't even.
Don't take that as like
Ay,
full throated endorsement. That's just me having fun because I think Jagmeet Singh's beard is quite elegant.
So and you and I have gone into this, I believe, early on in the show.
Mhm.
There's a number of politicians who are left of center who I do agree with. I look. This is going to get me shot in the U.S., although I liked Obama.
How dare you?
I think if you take any of the last 4 presidents that we've had, I'd pick Obama over any one of the 4.
Oh, absolutely.
I mean, he just was a good man. I didn't agree with his policies, and I like him, so I might not vote for him. Except as a man, I liked him, and I think
that's very similar to how I feel about Jagmeet Singh. Like, genuinely, like jokes about his beard and everything aside,
Well-
I genuinely feel like he's just a good person, even if I don't agree with every policy he
another
recommends.
example is Jack Layton.
Yeah.
Who
What is
was
it
that
with me and
MVP?
picking politicians with good facial hair?
Well, did he have
It
a
was
beard?
Layton.
Did Jack Layton have a beard?
No, he had a mustache. It was very, very manly.
Oh, he was the porn star mustache guy?
It wasn't a porn star mustache. It was a small, short, like well kempt gray mustache.
I'm
It was just
looking up.
it was like a
What's his name?
Jagmeet Singh?
Images.
Jagmeet Singh is just like straight up handsome. Jack Layton was also why can't I think of his name? Colonel Chris the astronaut guy, Chris Hadfield.
Yeah.
Similar mustache to him, but gray.
Okay, so Jagmeet Singh right there.
Oh yeah, like he just dresses in immaculate suits. He has the beard. He like long boards. He's just like a cool
Okay.
dude,
So now
and he
we're
talks
looking
about
for-
like issues. I mean, all politicians talk about issues, but I mean, he seems to take them more seriously.
Jack Layton.
Yeah, like
That's
That's just-
Hitler mustache. Come on.
that's not a Hitler stash.
If he shaved
No.
off like 3/8 of an inch
No.
off either side, he's Hitler.
Well, because the mustache is only 3 inches long. That's a sixth of the mustache. But no, that's not a Hitler stash. That is like how to describe? That is like a grill dad mustache right there. That is
Okay, so you
prime
get to
grill dad.
answer- You get to answer, Brad.
Let's
Then
start
we're
with the
talking
second
about
one.
trust- No. We're coming to the second one second.
Okay.
We're
Second
talking
one.
about
First
the
one. Bible talks about trusting government.
governments.
No, but it does talk about obeying it from time to time,
It
if not
does.
trusting it. I
And
don't
I'm
know if it ever
sorry,
talks about trusting it.
Hitler.
Not Hitler. Not Hitler. Not Hitler. When
And
you look
I
at
like
Hitler's
the guy,
face,
but I'm saying
when
Hitler.
you look at Hitler's face, it is nothing like nah.
I like the guy, and I'm saying that's a
Nigel
Hitler stash.
Farage. I know
It
that
isn't
name.
a porn
Who is-
stash, you're right. But
who is
it is.
who is Nigel Farage?
I don't know. Let's look him up.
No, that is like a. I want to say it's like a military mustache. I look at that and I think, wow, stand up guy, got his stuff together. Nigel Farage looks like a words. He looks pompous.
Ay. Who is this guy?
Actually, you know what he
Oh,
looks
of
like. You know
course,
what?
it's Turning
I'm
Point
gonna-
USA. He must be a. Oh, Brad,
Do you want me to? I'm gonna quote West Wing.
leader of the
You and Nigel-
Brexit Party. That
Yeah.
explains a lot.
Do you know what he looks like?
What does he look like?
He looks like he just got rammed up the ass with a broom handle with his pants on. To quote Toby from West Wing. Yes, British conservative.
Yes. Leader of
Second
the-
only in goofy looks to Boris, whose last name fails me right now. The current prime minister.
Boris,
do we
Yeltsin.
want? No, not Yeltsin. Do we want to look up Matthew 28:18? Because I don't know that off the top of my head.
Because
I-
he's proselytizing on the Will and Dave show. He can proselytize.
Okay, perfect.
I
We answered the
love
first
that.
2 questions. You got your freebie, and we even went into Nigel Farage and the broomstick up his butt.
That's right.
that's all the perks fandom gets you so
So
far.
we started on the, so we started on this on the topic of violence and protest, and we never really got into the violence and protest. There have been protests, and a lot of them
And violence.
were at the provincial government Canada Day. As this
A lot of the protests were Canada Day. Yeah.
Yeah, over this is a racist nation, and how anybody could look at Canada and call it a racist nation is beyond me, because it is anything
I mean,
but
All things are relative.
yes.
I mean, what was done there with the residential schools, that racist. Like
yeah.
that goes without
Well,
saying. Like,
Okay, let's come back to that for a second.
well,
Is it racist, or is it just the time of the day or the historical era
Mm,
where they came and they said, we're going to conquer this nation? And
but
here's what we're going to do.
nah.
We're going to bring our culture in, and we are the conquering nation.
I mean, yes,
That's how the
but
world was civilized, if you want to call it that.
so that's getting into some like real big scale philosophical debate about,
Right.
what rights do the conquered people have, or should they have rights? I mean, if we're
But to
talking
look
from a
at
humanitarian standpoint,
racism, Will laid on the broom. Oh my gosh, I got to put that one up.
put the broom down.
Brad's going to stand against
He's
the
got a
wall.
broom. It's cool. I'm white. They won't shoot me.
The If we're going to look at historical racial things or
Mhm.
racial actions, I think it came inside of a country that was a part of the culture of the country that sort of adopted it. I think when you look at Canada and the First Nations and even the U.S. and the Indians, it really was more of a conquering, and you can argue the conquering aspect of it. But I believe
Yeah,
it was a culture that arrived and said, "Hey, we're taking over your land. You can like it or not."
yeah,
And you can argue
and
the conqueror mentality and the expansion of the Western world through that.
yes, but the thing that it boils down to for me is like, just because we were the quote unquote conquerors, does that, like, calling it racist in the sense that the acts that were perpetrated against these people were because of their race or culture?
Yes.
Yes. Was it racist in the same sense as, slavery in the United States? Not quite. There's differentiating factors there, but I would still say that it is a racially based incident or series of incidents.
I don't know. For me, that's
I
too
mean,
broad of a stroke.
maybe it's I look at it as a, like, if it's like, if we're talking about like a funnel that kind of funnels these ideas and these situations into more refined ideas and discussions, I feel like calling that a racist thing is like the very outer edge of a funnel. It's like the really broad gate that we start getting into the conversation with. It's not the actual end of the conversation. It's just
Well, I would put it this
to help
way.
direct it.
So the French army and the English army who came over here, who settled here,
Hmm.
if it were First Nations over here, or if it were Mexicans here, the Hispanics, or if it were blacks here, or if it were Orientals who were on this land,
Hmm.
either way, they would have conquered them and said, "We're going to kill you, or want you to
Hmm.
adopt our lifestyle." So I
Hmm.
don't think you can say it's a racial aspect. Really, I think
I,
it's a conquering mentality, and saying you're not like us, and if you want to be like us, you have to be like us, as we're conquering you.
um, but yeah, for starters,
But
they didn't never ask, "Do you want to be like us?" or "If you want to be like us." It was like,
no, you're
"We're going to
exactly
make you
right.
like us. Deal
You're
with it."
exactly right. It's our land.
I
We're
I
taking it
think
from
that
you as we
just
got you
because they
settled,
happened,
which seems
just
logical to me.
because the same thing would have happened regardless of what race they were, that wasn't, Caucasian.
Right.
I think that doesn't really make it any less racist per se. But I feel like I use racist as like an entry level, like a blanket term to kind of start the conversation. I'm not equating it to being of the same gravitas as racism against African American people, or anything like that.
Well,
But I still think that a lot of what was done was racially motivated and racially biased, which makes it by definition such. But it's not in the same category, or in the same. I don't know the
so
word I'm
when is
looking for there.
violence okay?
I mean,
If we
technically,
don't agree with this, if we don't agree with their actions, when is violence okay?
now we're getting way off track into like super philosophy stuff.
Well, it
When is
started with
violence
violence and
okay?
protest. So when is violence and
Mm.
protesting that's okay?
Oh! In that
In
case,
protest. Yes.
in first world countries like ours, like
Yes.
in the States or like here, never. In my opinion, never.
When it's
unless,
peaceful protest, okay.
I mean, all the time. It should be okay all the time. Peaceful protest is a demonstration, and shouldn't be much more than that. When this is kind of why I wanted to bring it up, is I wanted to also rant on the fact that, like, so to give context, with these specific protests in Canada, along with the protests and the demonstrations, have been there was a statue of the Queen of England that was pulled down, and I believe there were 2 different churches that were burnt. One in Edmonton, and I think one in Calgary, but I'm not 100% sure on that. I know the one in Edmonton. Fun fact, neither of those churches were Catholic, to my knowledge, despite the residential schools being primarily Catholic run. That violence doesn't
The
help
churches
their
painted with a
cause.
broad brush.
Yeah, but like,
Yes.
the violence doesn't help. I would argue that it actually hurts their cause. If their cause is to bring awareness and to foster conversation and to hopefully foster change and reconciliation, burning down churches is not going to help. All that's going to do is people who are already like, who didn't really care about residential schools or what happened there,
Right.
all they're going to do now is equate these people and this movement to, you know, the BLM violent protests that happened in the States.
Right.
Or not violent protests, riots. There were protests and there were riots, and they were distinct things. Sometimes
there
they
were
happened at
violent
the same time in the
protests as
same
well.
place.
There were
Well,
violent protests as well.
see, I just don't like calling it a violent protest, because I don't think of it as that. There's
I think
protesting
you're right.
and there's violence. Sometimes they mixed and mingled and they happened at the same time in the same place, but I think that people were there to protest and people were there to be violent. And they both did what they came there to do. And what inevitably starting to happen is these people now in Canada are going to get compared to that, which
And isn't
is
that
not a fair
fair?
comparison.
Why not?
Well, I mean, sorry, not a fair comparison. I mean, we don't want that comparison. Like, if you are someone who wants to bring awareness about residential schools and change and reconciliation, however that may be, I don't know how to do that. But if you are someone who wanted to do that, someone burning the church in the name of your cause should be the last thing that you want, because that is only going to galvanize people against your cause. It is only going to paint it in a negative light, in a light that is not fostering any kind of proper good conversation, growth, or reconciliation. Like, it's just going to do nothing but create division.
Here's the question I have, and this is always, so here you're on the BLM riots, protests, etc. If you went to, so I'm going to make this easy. In your circle of influence and friends,
Mhm.
let's say you know 1,000 people,
Okay.
which you probably do through work, through school,
Mm.
through theater, etc. You probably know 1,000 people.
Okay.
If you were to poll all 1,000 of them and say, hey, do you agree with the residential schools and how they were handled and what happened with them, how many would give it the old thumbs up and say, yep. the
Good
church
job,
and the
residential
government-
schools. Way to go, Catholic Church.
Right. How many out of 1,000?
Thanks, Pope.
Yeah. How many of 1,000 do you think would
I
have
don't,
said,
I don't. You'd be lucky if you found one or two, I think. Especially considering my circle of people that I hang with.
Yes.
You'd be hard pressed to find one.
well, no, because included in your circle of friends are people like me and your Uncle Mallory and your Uncle Doug
Well,
and
still,
Tim Van Hoovel. There's a lot
so hard,
who are right.
they don't support. Don't. But even the right of centers look at residential schools and are like, wow.
So
But the problem is that they're taking issue with the movement. Like, not them specifically,
my
those people, but
question is with the majority of the protests,
Mhm.
it really is not for changing the idea of the general public. As if you poll the general
Right.
public, they don't like what happened.
Mhm.
What often happens in a protest is people get mad. This
Uh-huh.
should never have happened. They look around and everybody's agreeing with them. And they're like, oh, shoot, they all agree. I have to make my point louder.
See,
So you saw this in Peterborough, as you lived this in Peterborough when the white supremacists were going to hold that rally.
mhm.
And all the students and everybody all came and they were going to do a counter protest.
Mhm.
And the white skinheads never showed.
Mhm.
And there was a riot. and they turned over
Yeah,
cars and they broke windows
they,
and they
did, they
did
didn't
stuff.
turn over cars or break windows. There
They
was
broke
a.
windows. It wasn't the paper. They broke windows.
Oh, I didn't know about the broken windows.
You
They
sent me
didn't
the
turn over
article.
cars though.
You sent me the article.
They might have broken the cop car's window. So
Yeah.
what
So
happened
it was a
was,
protest, and they got there
yeah,
and there's nothing to protest, and like, oh shoot, well let's get mad anyways. And so they did. And this is
yeah.
what I think for people like me who are right of center, who look at the protests and say, who are you trying to convince?
I mean,
The
our
majority of
government.
society do not argue with you.
This is true.
And this is when we get aggravated when you have a protest. I'm saying you
Yeah.
really loosely. When there are protests, we're like, shut up and get a job, because I can't protest because I'm working. You know, and again, that is the general attitude on the right of center, is we look at it and we say, man, you don't need to do it. It makes you feel good is why they do it. And I know in
Maybe.
Canada, if you were to poll 100,000 people, maybe 10 would say, great job, schools.
See, I
So why
a
do they
little bit
protest?
agree. Well, I mean, the protesting is because they feel a great injustice has been done and their government is ignoring them. I don't think the protest is as much to convince the general populace as much as it is the government. Or the, I don't say convince the church, but to at least bring awareness of what the church did. So hopefully the government would do something. I've seen a lot of people calling out for taxation of the church in Canada. That's kind of becoming, I think, a bit of a rallying cry is tax them. And this is they're using the residential schools and what happened with them as kind of like a triggering event for that kind of change. I don't know if that's going to happen or not, but I think part of it. I think you're sort of right. I don't think that protesting makes them feel good as much as, especially in this day and age when I think we've kind of there was a time a few years back when, you know, posting on social media about social issues was like something that people did all the time.
Right.
I mean, they still do, but I think we've also kind of crested that, and we're on the flip side of that peak now, where posting on social media about social issues is kind of passé. Like it's
Oh, it doesn't stop them from doing it.
well, yes, but
You've been watching
I
Matt
think
Walsh on Twitter, your buddy Matt. I signed him up for Twitter, so you'd have to read him.
I noticed. Thank you. I didn't follow him. I mean, I look at his Twitter a lot to, you know, feel better about myself as a human being, but
He's the
now
only
I
one
have
that
to.
shows up on our feed anymore.
Anywho,
Anywho.
I think a lot of them do it because then even if a protest isn't going to, like a small protest like one in Fort St. John isn't going to make a, like, nobody's getting convinced of anything in Fort St. John, of all places. Either people already agree with you or they're just ignoring you. There's really not a whole lot of intermingling of those two groups, I think, in Fort St. John. Just dox myself. But I feel like it helps people feel like they're really a part of a movement, like they're part of some social change for what they see is a betterment of society. And it's arguable whether or not, especially small scale protests like ones here, actually make any difference whatsoever, apart from making these people feel like, even though their voice isn't being heard any more than it already was, especially any more than they could be heard on social media, I think they feel like it's a more tactile feeling of their voices being heard and making a difference. Even if it isn't actually doing that, it makes them feel like it
Makes
is.
them feel good.
It makes them feel good, or makes them feel connected to a cause.
Well,
So like this is why I support protest as a, because I think that feeling connected to a cause is good, and I think that at least even largely imperceptible efforts to try and foster social change is a good thing to be involved in, even if the change is almost non-existent or impossible. If people are going to get their kicks from something, I'd like them to get their kicks from trying to better society, even if it doesn't actually necessarily do a lot. If that makes sense, like it's kind of
here's my
wholesome in a weird way.
suggestion. Here's my suggestion, people.
Mm-hmm.
Stop protesting and elect some people who will actually do something.
We're trying.
So don't elect a popular guy who was on a reality TV show. And don't elect a person who's been a politician for 57 years. Elect a person who will do what you elect him to do.
Stop endorsing the Maverick Party, Dave. Jeez.
But here's the problem, Will, and this is a problem for the left, is the people, or the progressives, is the majority of the people who vote for them are voting for a cause, and they look for anybody who supports the cause. The majority people and politicians are looking for a crowd who they can hook on to and say, "Oh, I'll champion your cause," not
because you'll vote for me.
They believe in it, but because they see a voter block.
Absolutely, you're 100% on the nose there.
That's the issue with democracy that there's no good answer for. Is that at its heart, every democracy is a popularity contest.
Yeah.
And that is the problem of democracy. And as much as I don't
bring back the monarchy,
I don't want a monarchy either because I don't like the Queen.
Oh, okay. Communism?
So we're running a little bit low on time, and we have one more topic. And I threw this one at you this morning. I think I threw it at you this morning. Or was it yesterday?
Yeah, it was this morning. Late in the morning.
So I'm a fan of Mike Rowe.
I am too.
I really like Mike Rowe. But I wanted to ask you, so before we put this up, you made a statement and you said, I really like Mike Rowe, but I don't agree with everything he says. And I went back for about a half hour this afternoon. I looked for anything that he said which you shouldn't agree with, and I couldn't find anything.
I couldn't tell you.
Okay.
I feel like it's something that niggles the back of my head, because I'm sure you've shared an article with me, because we share Mark Rowe articles between each other with fair regularity. Every now and then he writes something poignant. One of us sees it first and sends it to the other. Yeah. I can't remember what he said that I didn't really appreciate. I couldn't tell you. All I know is that he has said, I know in the back of my head somewhere that he said some things that I didn't fully agree with, but not like I'm like, screw you, Mike Rowe.
For COVID, he's been really.
Yeah, that's probably it. Maybe. I don't know. I can't remember what the specifics of his stance on COVID, but.
So I read this article and I sent it to you, and it. So I don't hear Mike Rowe angry very often, and when I read this and he used that phrase, I thought we need to do this. So it's going to be a little bit long, although I wouldn't mind if you would read this, Will, as it'll be good for the podcast. And I think
so in its entirety, I'll just read right from the top.
Yeah.
Okay.
Let's do that.
All right. So I'm going to read this as close to verbatim as I can. I don't get angry much these days, but when I do, I try to conceal it, especially online where anger is cheap and fury is cheaper and outrage is free. But if this doesn't make you righteously enraged, I don't know what will. He sends a link to an article. This piece in the Wall Street Journal tells a truly terrifying story of several graduates from Columbia University, specifically graduates from their master's film school, who accrued a level of student debt that is almost impossible to comprehend. In exchange for this crushing, soul-deadening, mind-bogglingly unnecessary millstone of self-inflicted liability, each graduate... Yep.
That is verbal diarrhea of the worst form. How many adjectives did he have?
Soul-deadening, mind-bogglingly unnecessary millstone of self-inflicted liability.
Okay, go ahead.
I really enjoyed it. Each graduate received an education from the Ivy League. An education that will prepare them for a career in film, a career that will almost guarantee their complete and total inability to pay their loans, support a family, or work in their chosen field. Depending on your browser, this article might be behind a paywall, so I'm cutting and pasting a few relevant paragraphs for your edification and horror. I'm also sharing a few of the photos of students that accompany the story. I'm not doing this to shame anyone. Obviously, they have already consented to share their name and likeness in the national press, and frankly, I applaud them for doing so, because these people are living proof of what happens when we tell an entire generation that a university experience is the best path for those people. These are the cautionary tales we all need to see. The article starts like this. Recent film program graduates of Columbia University who took out federal student loans had a median debt of $181,000. Yet 2 years after earning their master's degrees, half of the borrowers were making less than $30,000 a year. recent Columbia film alumni had the highest debt compared with earnings among graduates of any major university master's program in the United States. The New York City University is among the world's most prestigious schools, and its $11.3 billion endowment ranks as the nation's 8th wealthiest private school. Not angry yet? Read on, because Columbia isn't alone. Far from it. At New York University, graduates with a master's degree in publishing borrowed a median of $116,000 and then had an annual median income of $42,000 2 years after the program. At Northwestern University, half of those who earned degrees in speech-language pathology borrowed $148,000 or more, and the graduates had a median income of $60,000 2 years later. Graduates of the University of Southern California's Marriage and Family Counseling program borrowed a median of $124,000, and half earned $50,000 or less over the same period. The no-limit loans make master's degrees a gold mine for universities. For the first time ever, graduate students are on track to have borrowed as much as undergraduates in the 2020-21 academic year. Is that not mind-blowing? Zach Morrison, the guy in the glasses in the picture, is typical of those profiled in the article. He's 29 years old with an MFA from Columbia, and he's finally come to the realization that he's screwed. So, to quote the article, there's always those 2 a.m. panic attacks where you're thinking, how the hell am I ever going to pay this off? His graduate school loan balance now stands at nearly $300,000, including accrued interest. He has been earning between $30,000 and $50,000 a year from work as a Hollywood assistant and such side gigs as commercial video production and photography. Sadly, Zach Morrison isn't alone. Check out this nightmare scenario from 41-year-old Patrick Clement. He too got suckered by the siren song of the Ivy League big time. As a poor kid and a high school dropout, there was an attraction to getting an Ivy League master's degree, said Clement, 41. He graduated in 2020 from Columbia, borrowing more than $360,000 in federal loans for the degree. To pay the bills, he teaches film at a community college and runs an antique shop. In about a dozen Columbia master's programs, the majority of recent graduates weren't repaying the principal on their loans or took forbearance, according to data released for the first time this year. After 20 to 25 years on an income-dependent payment plan, the balance of Grad Plus loans, roughly $11.2 billion issued in the school year that ended in 2020, can be forgiven. Taxpayers will bear any losses. Read that last sentence again and tell me you're not pissed. If you're not, read it again. A university with an $11 billion endowment gets to charge students whatever the students are willing to borrow, knowing full well the majority will never earn enough in their chosen field to pay off the debt. Fine, it's a free country, buyer beware, etc. But when the students default, as they almost surely will, you and I will pick up the slack. Why? Is it really America's best interest to create more aspiring filmmakers at over $300,000 per student? Consider the case of Matt Black. Matt graduated from Columbia in 2015 with an MFA in film and $233,000 in federal loans. He's a 36-year-old and struggling to make ends meet. He signed up for an income-based repayment plan that in leaner years requires no remittance, but with interest, his balance now stands at $331,000. Why in the world would anyone borrow that kind of money to study film? Steven Spielberg didn't, Christopher Nolan didn't, Paul Thomas Anderson, Ethan Coen, Wes Anderson, Terry Gilliam, Stanley Kubrick, never mind the Ivy League. Those guys didn't go to a film school at all. Hell, Quentin Tarantino learned everything he needed to make Reservoir Dogs working in a video store and watching movies for free. Why in the world did Matt Black think he needed to mortgage his soul to Columbia University to make a movie? According to the article, we were told by the establishment our whole lives that this was the way to jump social classes, he said of an Ivy League education. Instead, he said he feels such goals as marriage, children, and owning a home are now completely out of reach. During a car ride last year with 3 friends from the film program, Mr. Black said they calculated that they collectively owed $1.5 million in loans to the federal government. Financially hobbled for life, he said. That's the joke. I'm not laughing. Are you? Is anyone? I mean, aside from the hucksters and con men who are getting rich off this taxpayer-funded scam. Check this out toward the end of the article. Around 2/3 of domestic students in the MFA film program take federal loans. Grant Bromley, 28, accumulated $115,000 in federal loans while getting his Master of Arts in Film and Media Studies at Columbia. He had hoped to advance into academia after graduating in 2018. Instead, he moved back home with his parents in Knoxville, Tennessee. He now works at a TJ Maxx near Chattanooga. He is working on his 3rd feature film in his spare time, but currently earns around $16 an hour and can't afford to pay down his loan balance. Good God, where will it end and when will it stop? As
You
many of
can
you know,
most
sorry.
likely end there if you want. I don't think we need to read
Okay.
the rest, Will.
The long and short of it
Because he
is
talks
people taking out
about his.
ludicrously huge
Yeah.
loans for film school. And then the school knows that they can't pay them back. They know they'll default on the loans, but then taxpayers will have to pick up the slack once these kids are completely hobbled for, like, once these people are hobbled for life and go bankrupt and everything. What is it, chapter 7? I'm assuming is what they have to do in the States.
No,
Chapter 7, chapter 5
student loan debt is not
is
bankruptable.
is eternal.
It is not
That's right.
bankruptable here or in Canada, I don't believe.
I'm not sure. I've never gone bankrupt.
I read this and I did get angry, and not because of the kids, although I think they're dumb, but it's because of a society. I agree with Mike Rowe. There's a society which says if you go to college and you get a degree, you're worth more. And they're finding out that you're not worth more if you have a degree in underwater basket weaving.
Yeah.
Or apparently film school.
I mean, you're not necessarily worth more if you get a degree in anything. There are certain fields that have high demand for workers with those degrees, but those fields are relatively few and far between. I'd say less than half that have like really high prospects.
Yeah,
certainly out of Ivy League schools.
Yes, and that, I guess, is a part of this, is when you go to Brown University or you go to Harvard or you go to Yale and you get a degree in engineering. You say, well, I can go out and I can make $150,000 a year as an engineer, and then you realize there's a guy across the street who went to a school at a community college who also got an engineering degree, who will work for $100,000 a year. Who's the engineering firm going to hire? It's $50,000 in their jeans. They're going to hire the guy for 100. It doesn't add up.
Yeah.
And I share his outrage at the line that a lot of it is guaranteed by the federal government. So the government is on the hook. These people will die with student loan debt.
Yeah.
Which means that the government is on the hook for it. And that, to me, should make everybody upset.
Yeah. The fact that schools can push that with, like, so blatantly.
It gives me a lot of admiration for your younger sister who went to college, became a nurse, with zero student debt. Look, there's a number of people. Look at Michaela, who ended up with what, $8,000 of student debt or $10,000 at the end.
She had not even student debt. It's owed to her parents. It's
but
not.
Either way,
it's not money.
it's still debt, except it wasn't much. I mean, this is
not much.
This is a manageable amount of money.
Yeah, she got a 4-year degree at that price. Yeah. Like that's incredible.
And it was hard. And don't get me wrong. I look at you guys and how hard that you worked. You worked all summer, all winter. Every time you get a job, you took it. For Megan and Chad, they each were working through that. But it is, if you're smart, it is possible.
And she picked a line of work that was like she knew was actively hiring locally. And so she had essentially guaranteed work right out of the gate as soon as she got through college. So even if she had student debt, she would be in a position where she's actually making money to pay it back.
Well, Michaela is the same thing. There always is need for social workers.
Yeah,
now,
absolutely.
It is not as much money as nursing, except it is always there. You can always get a job as a social worker.
Exactly. There's no getting it and then being stuck in your parents' basement for 5 years waiting for a job.
Right. And except even at that, if you're going to be a social worker and you went to Trent University and get no scholarship and you ended up,
you'd have a lot of student debt.
You'd have a lot of student debt at Trent. That is not an easy thing to get out of at $50,000 a year, $60,000 a year, which is what they would make as an entry-level social worker. And I think that society it sold you kids a bill of goods.
Yeah. I would say my generation specifically, like the coming generation, seems to be at least somewhat, like, I'm going off of what I see on like TikTok and Instagram and whatnot. They seem to be somewhat aware of the fact that you don't need a degree to be worth money. Like that having a degree is not, I mean, they're still not going into trades, but at least they're not being suckered into the idea that you're not worth anything if you don't have a degree. my generation was fed that a lot. Like I remember taking a lot of, not, I don't want to say flack, but everyone, when I was like about to graduate high school, everyone's like, where are you going to college, Will? Where are you going to university? It was automatic. Where are you going? Because you got to go somewhere, or you're just really not fully complete. Like you're not making it if you're not getting a degree.
So your brother Alex
And,
was offered a job as working for one of the rental car agencies here.
mm-hmm.
He's offered a job in management, except he needs a degree. And I said, what does he need a degree in? And the recruiter said, it doesn't matter. He just
You just
needs
need a degree.
Well,
Yeah,
how
stupid.
asinine is that?
Yeah,
It
how stupid
honestly,
is that?
it made no difference. All they want to see is he dedicated?
Mm-hmm.
Is the whole, and so you have to go to school for 4 years, have a degree. It doesn't matter what it's in. It could be underwater basket weaving, and he could get a job as a manager at a rental car agency.
Mm-hmm.
Well,
That's stupid.
why don't you
His
use
degree
your
doesn't
head?
change how well he does his job.
Absolutely. It makes no difference.
Mm-hmm.
And I think when we look at education in the U.S., it and in Canada, although in Canada, a lot of it is subsidized, and that
Mm-hmm.
it was easier for Megan and to get her nursing degree in Canada,
Yeah.
as it did work.
And
Her whole school year, for all 4 years, I think it was about 80,000, which here
yeah,
you're probably looking at 50,000 a year to become a nurse. But
and like if you were to go somewhere if you were to go somewhere in Europe, like I'm not 100% sure if this is correct, but like a Denmark, where tuition is basically non-existent. You just, I could see it being a more of a requirement there, because then, like you say, it's proof of
right,
your dedication and
yes,
diligence, and it didn't cost you a buttload of money to do.
right,
I mean, yeah, it wasn't free because you still have to like house yourself while going to school and everything, but it's nowhere. It's not even in the same zip code as what's happening in the
right,
States, where, like you say, it's like $50,000 a year
right.
to get a decent degree, and people require it, and that's ludicrous. Get a trade.
Yeah, and that's Mike Rowe's point: is get a
Get a
trade.
trade.
Go to school for 4 months a year, for 3 months a year. I don't even think it's 3 months, is it, for a trade? Is it
Depends
3
on the
months?
trade. It depends largely on the trade and
Yeah.
where you're doing it. I mean, in Canada, I think it's maybe 3 months a year for most
And
tradesmen.
most of the trades,
Will pay for it.
yeah, there are companies who will pay you to get your journeymans.
Yeah.
So I mean, I know I have a son-in-law who's doing that very thing. He gets paid to go to
Mhm.
school for however many weeks a year, and at
Yeah.
the end of it, he will be an electrician, or
Mhm.
instrumentation, or whatever he's getting.
Yeah, electrical instrumentation. You were right on both of them,
Oh, there we go.
I think.
I
Anyways,
like being right. It
yeah.
doesn't happen often.
You were half right twice, so I mean, take it with a grain of salt.
So there's not a whole lot of argument here on either of our.
It's more like a PSA.
Yeah.
Student
Stop
debt bad.
borrowing
Get a
money
trade.
for school.
Or this is something that I wish I had done, because the other thing that came along with this pressure to get a degree is also to get the degree straight out of high school,
Yes.
which you don't have to do. You're like 18. You can spend a few years. You could spend a few years and get a trade, and then go to school for something different. And if you're working as a tradesman, you can pay for, I would, in Canada at least, working part-time as a tradesman, you could pay for most schooling. Like most tradesmen make really good money.
Well, the problem with that is, Will, is most of the people, when they get a trade, they realize how much they can make. They
And
don't
they just
bother
stick with
going
it.
back to school, because why
Yeah,
bother?
I'm just saying, like, if you really want a degree in something, like if underwater basket weaving is really what you want to do with your life, don't go into $200,000 with a student debt right out of high school to get it.
Right.
Go spend 4 years, get a trade,
Right.
spend a year or two saving. You're still 24 years old after 6 years,
Yeah.
and you could probably get your basket weaving degree without any debt whatsoever.
Yeah.
Because it's not just the initial debt; it's the interest.
No.
Like all these numbers from that article, they all start in like the early 100,000s, but by the time the interest is calculated in, it's over 300,000.
Yeah.
So it's one thing to pay $100,000 for a degree. It's another thing to
Not
pay $100,000 for a degree plus interest.
Yes. It is not insignificant.
Yeah.
So I know I raised you in all the drives that you would go with me, and we listened to Dave Ramsey rant.
Rice and beans, beans and rice, rice and beans.
Yes. And one of his rants is against student loan debt, because
Mhm.
he said for so many kids, you're underwater
Before you
the
start.
instant you leave college. You don't own a house yet. You're not married yet.
Mhm.
You have no other assets except for a huge amount of debt.
And a hunk of paper.
And that may or may not. And I think especially when you get in the fine arts, I mean, the odds of getting $1 million as a teacher is pretty slim.
Yeah.
And becoming a teacher and going through Ivy League universities.
Yeah. And it's like,
it's hard.
I'm a firm believer that like most fine arts, you shouldn't be like getting a degree and expecting to get into a fine art out of the gate. Like nobody becomes a famous artist overnight. Well, not nobody, but it's like winning the lottery.
Yes.
You'd be better off getting schooling in something else, like a trade, and then start doing art on the side. Work your way into
Here's
it.
The one I don't understand.
Cough. That's what I'm doing. Cough.
See, here's what I don't understand. I am so slouchy today. I'm sure your mom is yelling at me, and
I'm just sweating so much that I'm slowly sliding down my chair. That's all.
There's a lot of parents nowadays, and we're not one of them. So you kids are screwed.
Go you.
Well, no, it actually looks bad on you guys, but
okay.
There are lots of parents who actively are paying for bad educations. The mom and dad have invested in college education funds. Little Johnny decides, I want to go be a social worker. And mom and dad say, oh, okay, well, we've been saving, so why don't you go and become a social worker? So the schools are getting it from a portion of society who the boomers have been saving this money for little Johnny. And little Johnny wakes up and says, I want to go and I want to be a film director.
Yeah. How many people have you met in your life that knew with that level of certainty what they wanted to do with the rest of their lives at 18? And actually and actually followed through with that and were content and happy with it. Have you ever met a person who did that?
No, but I tell you what I have met is I've met a lot of 18-year-olds because I have 4 of them that I've raised who were pretty damn sure they knew what they wanted to do with themselves at 18.
Mm-hmm.
Now, I knew they didn't, and any reasonable adult around them knew that they didn't know.
Right?
But
I would feel
sure
uncomfortable. I would feel uncomfortable shelling out $100,000 for an 18-year-old to make a decision saying they know what they're going to do the rest of their lives. And I'm going to be like, yeah, sure, kid, but here's $100,000 to go try.
Well,
hope for the best.
So Brad Hedstrom is looking for people with brooms?
You think he's watching out for people with brooms? I think I put the fear of someone into him.
The fear of broomsticks.
Fear of broomsticks.
It doesn't even help to keep your pants up.
There's no safety from these sticks.
Well, we should wrap this up, Will. We haven't argued much, although I did want to bring this one in. I was texting Will, and last week after the show, we sort of got into it. And today he was texting me back and said, hey, Dave, I don't want to be a jerk, but he said you were kind of right. And I wrote you back.
That is not what I said.
Approximately. You said
no, it is not.
What did you say?
I messaged you and I was saying, hey, this is not me being snooty or passive aggressive. I just want to reassure you that I'm putting in all this extra time to make sure my camera, my lighting and everything are tickety-boo before the show tonight. Just because I didn't want you to think that I was saying that because I'm like, okay, Dad, I did all these things just like you asked.
Well,
I didn't want you to think I was being like that.
Anyways, the point of this was I sent him back a clip of one of my favorite movies, and I'm not going to play the clip, but the scene in the movie is Michael Keaton. Somebody calls him an ass, and he says, "You are an ass." And Michael Keaton looks at him, and he does his whole thing, and he says, "Let the record show I am an ass." I'm sure you can do it much better, but
I don't even know what movie it's from, but I've heard the line before.
Much Ado About Nothing. You really ought to watch it.
Oh, it's been a long.
It's word for word Much Ado About Nothing, but it's very good.
Is that the one with Keanu Reeves?
Yes.
And okay, yeah, I have seen it a long time ago, but I've seen it.
Michael Keaton, he's only in it for maybe 5 minutes. He probably got more.
It's a good line
per minute than anybody else in the movie. But
man, he's really good at doing that. We just watched Beetlejuice the other night, and Michael Keaton just kills it in that movie. The movie itself is mediocre, but Michael Keaton is like amazing.
Yes.
Anywho,
so that is my word for the week is I am an ass, and let the record show that Dave is an ass.
No contest. I'll let you have that one. I won't even argue.
Do you have any wise words to finish the show, Will, before everybody acknowledges that I am an ass?
I do. All right, folks, stay safe and don't die.